Welcome, Deborah. I am so happy to have you here and be a part of this study, so to speak, of teachers that have taught for a number of years within the Enneagram and know other typologies, have communities. So I'm making the rounds, and you are a must-have on this series. So how are you?
Pretty good. Aging is not for sissies, but I'm good.
Like I always say, I'm past my expiration date.
I'm okay.
Yeah. We do the best we can with what we can, right?
Yeah.
I think I met you for the first time. Do you remember what year it was?
I think it was at an IEA conference. Naranjo was there, 2004.
Didn't we meet before that?
Did we meet at an AET?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I started with Helen and David in 1998.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you go each year thereafter?
Yeah, I went, of course, for the 2 years, the 18 months that it was, and then I was a therapist for the group, so I went. I went on.
Right, for sure. I saw you because I went over every time. There were never enough people on the 8 panel, and I live in the same town as the land of Ennea. I call it Vallombrosa.
Yeah, exactly, Vallombrosa. Right.
There, Donna Russ taught there. Ted and Kathy did one time, and then of course Helen and David still.
Right.
And I haven't taught there since COVID, but it's generally my go-to place.
Yeah, I haven't taught anywhere since February of 2020 when COVID hit, with the exception of corporate teaching.
Yes.
Still do a lot of corporate work, so.
Same with me. It seems like I did do something. Yeah, you're right. People are getting back into it. I've had a lot of invitations. I just wasn't able to go to the place at the time. But yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You discovered the Enneagram in 1998, or did you learn about it earlier and then decide to certify?
Yeah, so I learned about it earlier. Somebody came up. I was studying Adlerian therapy with a friend, and she said, you're an 8. And I said, I have no idea what that means. And she gave me Riso Hudson's first book, The Enneagram. And
personality types, you mean?
Personality types.
That was Don. And then they redid it.
Right.
And he did understanding. Then they did it together around
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I had it by both of them. And I remember telling Kathleen, you know what, I'm just going to start teaching this. I read the book and I thought, I know this. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I can go and do this. This is a piece of cake. And of course she said, no, you need to be certified.
I started teaching it immediately because I, managed businesses for a long time. I had done studies in the field I was in, and then I also knew all the typologies. So this was the new typology to add to everything else. So I immediately had my clients, but then I decided, okay, I should certify because I wanted everyone's point of view.
Yeah, and I did too. I certified with Helen and David, and I think I probably finished the certification around 1999 or 2000, can't remember. And then I've studied with Don, Helen, with Kathy Hurley and Theodore. Oh my God, I've studied with so many people just, over the years. Did some Eureka work.
Excellent. Yeah. It gives you a really well-rounded perspective. I had the same experience certifying with all the early teachers, and then of course attending every other event at the conferences. And then in addition, that 10-day intensive with Naranjo where he validated my subtype research was just amazing. Because it was the first time coming back after almost 24 years. So he was really invested.
Right.
And then with Ichazo, to see the way he was in person, he was very powerful, dynamic 9, just a really, you know how 9s can get really big, and he had very, very strong energy and dynamic. He went from being mild-mannered to really definite. It was impressive to see. I spent a year on the island of Maui where his teachers were that did all his authorized trainings, and we became good friends. And then I learned, gosh, just everything I wanted to learn, really, to understand the whole evolution of all these different approaches, which is why I'm here with you, because what did you find compelling about the Enneagram?
Oh my God. Well, initially I thought it was, scary that it could be misused in so many different ways. But it was also, it was like somebody followed you around and wrote down everything about,
Yeah.
for years, I had years and years and years of therapy, and I thought there was something really wrong with me. Then I found the 26 years. Then I found the Enneagram and I thought, I'm okay. Everybody else is messed up. Once I was able to see the 8 component, it was like, okay, well, I don't need to change. This is who I am. I need to evolve this. I need to get more conscious. I need to become more aware, and of course, working with Helen and all of the other teachers allowed me to start the work of developing the inner observer. And that was very helpful. So.
Yeah, that's so, so true, because I remember getting Kathy Speeth's notes before I ever took a course. And the person sitting next to me in a class on symbols was just the person that the instructor happened to ask, have any of you used or know of the Enneagram in the modern day application? Of course, this woman to my left did. And he said, can you say a little bit about it? And she did. And I go, oh, wait, can we talk? Can we go to lunch? And then she proceeded to very kindly teach me the whole thing. She had been in Kathy Speeth's course at ITP, getting her graduate degree. And so I thought, wow, little did I know that I had a friend who was a 3 that had also done that, but she'd never mentioned it to me. Even though she knew I loved typologies, it never occurred to her. So I could have learned even earlier. But that was 1985 for me. So
Wow.
There wasn't a lot you could find on different perspectives. The book with O'Leary, Beesing, and Nogosek was out, but you wouldn't know about it unless you were in a class with them.
Unless you lived in Ohio, unless you lived in Cincinnati, which is where they came together to teach. A lot of the Jesuits came into Cincinnati to teach. That was why I started the 3rd school, Helen and David on the West Coast, Don and Russ on the East Coast. And then I thought, Cincinnati was a hub. So I went ahead and started the School of Conscious Living here because we got a lot of information, from Patrick and Maria, and just a ton of information.
That's beautiful to hear. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
It was, it came down from Chicago with all of those Jesuits who, began to teach it everywhere. And so Patrick was one of the first teachers I remember seeing,
Yes, indeed. Patrick, I interviewed Patrick as well. I don't know if you've seen that.
Nice. No, I haven't.
And Jerry, to just kind of fill in the gaps. I had done an interview course with Naranjo to understand more, but wasn't videotaped. And he said a lot. And then he wrote things in his autobiography. And I thought, well, let's see, they're saying it's 1971 that they started teaching, the fall of 71. But I know for a fact from him that he was teaching in Berkeley, September 21st, 1971, those SAT groups. So I think maybe some of the misunderstanding is he didn't formally begin his SAT groups until September 21st, 1971. But when he was at Esalen, he did meet Robert Oakes there and told him about the process.
Right.
And then it all kind of fell into place. The discrepancies went away.
Right. Well, I didn't meet Naranjo at this time, but I met the system in 1974 when I was studying at UC Berkeley. And I did my first 2 years of my liberal arts there. And I met the system, and that's when I thought, oh my God, this is not good. And so I just kind of set it aside because, I was going to be a real scientist.
Yeah. The real thing.
The real thing. And of course, here I am back with the real thing because I do think it's amazing and shifts consciousness.
Yeah, it sure does. So who did you teach with at first? Your people that you were already working with as a therapist, or did you go out and into the community? And tell me how it evolved.
Yeah, so I actually started teaching at New Thought Unity with Kathleen and Tom. We did classes, 2 6s. We did classes, for the community. We had large classes. And I taught with Mary Monks, who had a specialty in alcoholism, and so we would talk about the types and do panels. And so I taught with her. So primarily, I kind of was a one-person show. It's not easy to take a back seat. It's not easy for me to take a back seat in teaching. And then, of course, I taught for years with Beth O'Hara, and now I teach with Kathy Hudson. So I do think it's good to have, another person in the room. Most of what we do now is online, on Zoom, except for the corporate stuff. And I go into the corporations for that.
I think so. It gives a different perspective, a different pacing, tone. It kind of balances things out in a nice way. I've done, of course, 14 years with David Fauvre, where we co-taught.
Of course.
And then I've taught with other people in the last 10 years. And recently just correlated on a more formal level, the Enneagram types, Tritypes, and MBTI, which was great fun because I'm working with Joyce Mang. We did the research, which was the follow-up to an earlier research study. And it's fun to do it with someone who also knows both systems.
It is. It's really, it is because, especially my combining the spiral dynamics with the Enneagram, I was like, there was very few people who understood it. I think when I taught it, I think you were in the class that I taught at an IEA conference.
Yes.
Russ was the only one there who knew the spiral and, who knew of the spiral. And the rest of the teachers, some of the big teachers, that's where my research began, hadn't heard of it. And so I taught that. And then
What year was that, Deb? Because I did know the spiral.
I think it was 2000, might have been 2008 or 7.
Was that the first time you taught it? Actually,
that was the first time I taught it. I just taught the spiral. I didn't teach the spiral and the Enneagram. That was something that evolved out of my research. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And what made you decide to correlate the two? Because I did that with everything I know. So
yeah, well, Ken Wilber has always been an influence in my life, and I was reading Integral Psychology. I was on a retreat and I was reading Integral Psychology, and he said, someplace in the beginning of the book, I always say page 57, but who knows what page really was. He said, the Enneagram's a great typography, but it's flat. Wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody paired it with something like spiral dynamics? Well, I'm like, I can do that because I'd studied with Don Beck for years and was certified by him, and had studied with Helen and David, was certified. And I'd always thought that it was flat. I always thought that it needed dimension, like it had to be more multidimensional. And so to hear him say that just kind of pushed me into doing it. So I asked Don. You may remember Don actually did a keynote speech for us at an IEA conference, I think. And he started with, you guys really think this Enneagram is worth anything? And did it. So did the keynote. And that was interesting. But Helen and he neither one of them wanted to combine the systems at the time. So I thought,
I'm so glad you did.
I got the blessing, so I went ahead and did it.
Is there anything you want to quickly say about that combination? Because it's very meaningful for people who don't know anything about it.
Well, the spiral takes, the double helix, which is, life conditions, time, place, circumstances, and people, and pairs it with cognitive capacity. So in the spiral, consciousness is cognitive capacity. It's how we think about what we think about. And so you probably know this just from your research with the Tritypes. It's like an 8 at red is very different than an 8 at yellow.
No question.
They look very different. They present very different. And I can't, there's so many books that I read where it looked like 8s were being written about it red or orange.
Yeah.
And I was, that's not who I really am. That's a part of, I mean, I can be that, that's for sure. So, and my kids started saying, people are reading the Enneagram books and they can't locate themselves in the Enneagram. They can't locate them. My kids are now 40 years-ish, 40-ish. And so we began just like every time a kid would come over, we would type them and we would start to look, and we began to see the multidimensionality that the spiral brings. It gives us depth. The Enneagram is great. You may remember in my research, I put the Enneagram on the horizontal line and the spiral on the vertical line.
That's
so
right.
you can see as your level of consciousness increases, not that it has to increase. You can just stay right where you are for the rest of your life. And many people do, but as it increases, your mental capacity expands and duality kind of starts to be reconciled, is the way I would say it from an Enneagram perspective. It becomes more reconciled. And so
now
I think
it's third force that comes in, and then you're working with that. It's a very different dynamic than a dialectic approach, rather than Ichazo's focus on integral theory, which he taught long before the Enneagram. In fact, he identified with that very much, the integral work. And he liked everything combined with the system, the way Naranjo did.
Yeah. But, I started studying Gurdjieff way before the Enneagram and working with the fourth way concepts. And his was about consciousness as well. Yes. He didn't call it spiral dynamics. He didn't have that language. But when I go back and look, at everything that I know, it absolutely was, expanding one's consciousness or expanding our cognitive capacity, how we think about what we think about. And it was, made nothing but sense. And just recently, I think you'll get a kick out of this. This is a Ken Wilber thing, combining all kinds of systems. I know you love this. Yes. A number of our teachers loved it, but I've just taken Russ's 9 levels of health, Russ and Don's 9 levels of health, and I'm putting them at every level of the spiral. And so, what we would call healthy, a healthy behavior is not a healthy behavior in red.
Yeah, exactly.
So we would say the health would be different according to which level of consciousness. So I'm working on that.
That's great.
Something to keep me out of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, here we are still teaching and still adding new things, but I always want the time to do it, and I'm always seeing it. So why not map it somehow? I like teaching it in those nuances, because I've worked with people from all walks of life in the elite fields where they're pretty shallow and superficial. And then occasionally I'd meet someone that wasn't. It would be like, oh, okay, this isn't that bad. But most of the people just did not think beyond the glamour of the world they were in. And I understand that, or they wouldn't have been attracted to that field. I fell into it. It wasn't by design. It was an ape mentor that insisted that I have a backup and not just be a psychologist. Anyhow, she sent me to training at age 16 to Hollywood to be trained as a makeup artist. So I go, oh, okay. It was summertime. Why not? And it served me very well, because she had a heart attack 3 years later. And she had taught me everything to do for a business. She wanted me to walk out of there before I even finished my degree and be able to run a business. And nice. It worked out for both of us, because as a result, I could adjust my college schedule so that I could be at her studio enough of the day to still take care of her clients. So nice. Yeah, there's really something to be said for that, and these correlations, and when we were born and what was going on. Like if we think about Naranjo and Ichazo, they were kind of the new kind of change in psychology, where you weren't just looking at nurture, you were looking at nature. They thought the Enneagram was just nurture. But after many years, enough for children to be born and grow up, they realize, oh, no, it is both.
Yeah. Well, there are some people who still think it's nature, that, you're born with a type. I don't believe that, because now I have 3 grandchildren and I'm tracking, how they evolve. And I can see, my oldest is 7, and I can see she's a 4. There's no doubt in my mind. But I could see prior to that, I could see almost every phase, every type that she went through. And so it's really, it's definitely nature, nurture. I mean, I think that's how we've always taught it.
Yeah, because our environment always influences our world and our genetics. So however we look at it, they come together. Yeah. But in terms of like looking at your type, not as an 8. So you talked about an 8 at red. Do you mind talking about an 8 at all the levels? All the spiral, all the colors?
Well, I think again, just want to say that most books write about 8s at red, orange. You don't see a lot of green 8s unless you have a social 8. And then social 8s are more about the we, or about the tribe, or about the group. And so we can see that as we evolve. When I look at, by the way, I've now started teaching that our instincts, sexual, social, self-preservation, reside in beige. And beige runs all the way through the spiral, as you know.
Right.
And exactly. So the instincts are with us no matter what. It doesn't matter how smart we get, or how awake or conscious we become. Our instincts are still driving the machine. And so, I say we pick up the instinct that arises, and we put our type on it, and that's our type in it, and that's what protects us in a sense. So we go beige, and then purple. We don't see much purple in the world because, less than 10% of the world actually lives in purple. Very few indigenous groups that haven't been contaminated by the outside. And then of course red is about hedonism and impulse. Like everybody thinks that that 8s are just these impulsive people who have no ability to control themselves, and and that's why I say we've been written about at red. And so hedonism, impulse driven, and at the same time an 8 in red. These are probably the 8s that end up in the penal system, because they don't have a sense of consequences or tomorrow.
Yes.
And so we see a lot of that. I know you've worked with EPP and so forth, so we see a lot of that. Then of course there are a great number of 8s that we can look at in blue, one being Martin Luther King Jr. And he took those teachings and made it for the greater good. And those were traditional teachings, and that's how the 8 shows up traditionally, as a sort of like, I wouldn't say a way shower, but as a leader of the traditions, holding them at the same time
to the highest perspective.
Same time being willing to break the rules if they feel like they need to. And then orange, we see a lot of orange 8s, because it's learning how to use the power that we get at red, but we've modulated ourselves a little bit. We're not wanting to just tell people to go to hell. We're like, we're going to do it with tact.
Highway or the highway. Yeah. Or I'm out.
Do it with a little tact.
Highway, I'd say.
Yeah. And so we see those. We see orange 8s generally running their own companies. You and I, have passed that level, and that's where we started our companies and so forth. And so we see that. And then as I said, green, we see, I think we see a lot of social 8s in green. I have a lot of green because I love building communities, around the world. And then when we get into yellow, that's when we get to the 8s that are showing us the way. 8s who become the mentors, the way showers. I like to say when I'm teaching that duality kind of recedes. We see it, and we can get into our own thing just like anybody can. this or that, good or bad, Trump or Biden or whatever you want to get into, you can get into those things. And at the same time, the bigger picture is more like, no, we're one, and we really need to operate as one, and we need to come together in unification and unity consciousness. And I think we start to see eights showing the way there. I don't see a lot of people in turquoise, so I don't talk about that very much. I have this fantasy that maybe all of the people who live in turquoise are in think tanks, and maybe at some point that'll be my next gig. I'll be in a think tank someplace thinking stuff up, which I love to do.
The way Don and Russ describe someone at the top of the levels of development, like we can all behave in that way, but can we think and process in that way? And for what it's worth, with the 8, most of type 8 was lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. What came through was more the description of the 863, which is that power, the intensity, the focus, wanting things in an absolute way. And their execution is phenomenal. But then it was just the lower side. I remember asking Naranjo, why isn't there more about the counterbalance, the higher side to all these things? And he said, well, why would I want to write about people when they're not suffering? I'd rather write a book that shows the suffering. I said, so you think all 8s are like narcissistic? And he said, no, but they may just have that kind of presentation. Like they can make fun of themselves. They can think they're great, think you're great, and then think they're not great, and neither are you. So he still saw it as a polarity. And there is truth in that. There really is, because it's like, yeah, we're great. Oh, never mind.
Especially at certain levels.
Exactly. And so that was his philosophy. A lot of times people struggle with his book for that reason, because they don't understand. He was looking at the pathology. What they didn't understand as well is that he added the psychological personality traits. He just imagined 9 buckets, and he took all the work he'd done with collected as a psychiatrist, and then the research studies. He was Fulbright at Harvard, and with their personality. And Ohio State is where all the research was done in the 60s. He was there, and then he was in Berkeley and Santa Cruz here. So he was very progressive for his time. And so he just thought, okay, Karen Horney's 3 types. Okay, who gets aggressive? And he kind of just put them in. Who gets kind of compliant or dependent? And he put those in. And then he just went around. And then he decided later that some of them weren't quite right, not as perfect as he hoped, and modified it. But people didn't know he modified it, obviously, because he didn't come out with a book till after the Eureka conflict was over. And yeah, he did books. He was very prolific, but he was doing it with others, and they were based on his workshops. So they didn't have everything. But did you ever see him speak other than at the conference?
Oh yeah, I saw him speak a number of times. Yeah. I actually was signed up to go to the retreat that you were at with him out in
Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, okay. Well, I was signed up for the one in northern California, but they couldn't handle my dietary needs. And they wouldn't allow me to bring, the gluten issue, they wouldn't allow me to bring anything in. So it was like, okay, I can't go. So, but that was the only time that but I've seen him teach numerous times. Yeah.
Yeah, because there aren't that many videos on him. I had seen him twice before I met him, because each April he'd be in Berkeley writing. And then he would talk at the Unity Church on whatever his latest thoughts were. Like I remember Enneagram and Society, he did probably in 94. And then, so I had seen him, and I remember first thinking, he's an INTP, he's spending too much time on the 3, 6, and 9. He's going to zip around the other types. I bet that means something. And then I could relax. That's exactly what he did, and everything made sense. But other people said, when's he going to get to 2? When's he going to get to 3? But, he also saw himself as an INTP, and it just completely matched. But as an ENTP, I could relate.
Yeah.
Because I was just an extroverted version. Okay, there's a reason he's doing this. But in the course, he was so flexible. He'd answer any question.
Right.
Everything I'd stored up for years, I asked him, and it worked out very nicely.
And he would shift. I mean, if he could get information, like if you could give him information that was different from what he would shift that, he would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Let me think about that from that perspective kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
and he did, because he'd done phobic and counterphobic 6, I had noticed in my research that doing the inquiry process, which fools the superego, he had kind of introduced a concept with phobic, counterphobic that I saw with people who knew nothing about the Enneagram, as well as those that were Enneagram enthusiasts, that there was only one what I called stereotype, he called archetype of each Enneagram type. And then there were 2 that were countertypes that you wouldn't know at first glance that they were that type, unless you, in my case, listen to the language, because that's where I found the research.
Mm-hmm.
And the body language, like you could have identical twins. And I've worked with several sets of identical twins, actually 10 sets. So it's 20 people, actually more with the kids that I did. Okay, 14. But you could see how they were different Enneagram types, or maybe they were the same Tritype in another stacking order, or their instinctual stacking was different. And it was really noteworthy that because he'd read my book right before we began the course, he was willing to look at that. And so I shared my research, and then he would yay or nay it. And he agreed with all of it. And then he ended up talking about the countertypes. But he thought at first people were asking him to do a counterphobic of every type.
Right,
right. Fear, but not acting like a type. So he gave an example of Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, and as a sexual 4, and Patton, George W. Patton. And I go, time out. I get Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman.
Right.
Patton, no. Why are you saying he's not an 8? Why are you saying he's a 4? And he said, oh, well, the biggest thing is he designed the uniforms. I said, do you know why he designed the uniforms? And he said, because he wanted to look good. I go, no, he designed them for getting in and out of a tank and sitting the whole time. And he went, oh, I did not know that. He didn't say it like that, much more mellow.
Right.
That's, what did he like to say? Oh, that's an interesting notion. That's what he liked.
Interesting.
I can't even, I'm not a good mimic. And then when I sent him what I wrote about all the things we didn't know in the Enneagram, I said, please cross out anything where I missed the mark or didn't understand you properly. And he crossed out Patton. So he changed his mind from the end of the training, and they wrote a little note. He designed for comfort. That's more 8. But I really respected him for that reason.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
Great teacher, great teacher. A little interesting, but and great.
It was interested in all the testing instruments too. And those 10 days, we had one every day.
Nice.
Every evening, I think. Yeah, we went to dinner, had the testing instrument, and then we went home. We did other things like the soupy greeting or whatever, but he liked to take all the systems that he knew and see what his attendings did.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a result, I just started teaching the countertypes, but they're just woven into my work.
Right.
So I added it. Well, part of type 9 was put into type 2. So the naturally helping, the more trying to make people feel better version was put into 2. And both can be very kind, but the 9 identifies with kindness is more important than what you offer, being a kind. And then a chunk of type 2, like the hedonistic, adventuristic part of 2, was put into 7. So there are a lot of twos that think they're sevens.
Correct.
And then only one really stereotype of 6 was known until the counterphobic 6 was understood. But there are 7 archetypes for every Enneagram type. But whole chunks were left out. And then with these different teachers and teachings, I could see what was left out when. And do you remember Ted and Kathy, when they were Ted and Kathy, later as Theodore, when he changed his name? But I thought they had a great description of type 8 and type 7, like they had done maybe so many study groups that they could see it. But I already had modified all that myself. And how did you work with community? And when did it start? When did conscious living start?
You know, it started, the School of Conscious Living Center started in 2000. I mean, yeah, 2000.
Yeah, that's 20
right.
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when I just started my awareness that, you know, I needed the 3, you know, the 3 jewels of Buddhism, the, you know, the teacher, the teachings, and the, you know, the community. And I started teaching, and we did big retreats, and we did all kinds of things. We had big classes. It was wonderful. And I've since sold this, you know, the building that I worked out of, and I no longer have what I think of as, you know, in person, although I do. Yeah, I don't have freestanding stuff. And at the same time, right now, I'm working on maybe a retreat at my place in Asheville. So, you know, a retreat for, you know, people who've been with me for a long time, sort of our 4th way students kind of thing. So that's when I started it. I just, you know what, I might have told you this, I probably told you this, but I was pumping gas at a Shell station, and I got this, you know, this vision kind of thing, like the good news is, and the bad news is. And it was about starting this, you know, the center. And when I started it, I had a Vedic astrologist tell me that I started the school, and I called it the mystery school. And the Vedic Vedic astrologist said, you're ahead of your time. Nobody's going to come. You know? Call it something else, and then they'll come. So I did. And that's how I got it to be the School of Conscious Living. So
it's a great name and a great symbol too. I love that symbol, just in existence.
Great designers, great designers who make symbols. I like that.
Yeah, that is great. And what became of the video that was done, I believe in like 2006, maybe, or when was that? That you supported someone creating a video game of the Enneagram types.
I was just in a meeting this morning. We're starting. Yeah, we're still together. It's called Conscious Dimensions. Play, you know, in just one games. And I was in a meeting this morning. We're going to start teaching. You may or may not know, but I wrote with this team 9 books, 1 on each type. They're around. Now we're doing them as a novel instead of the workbook that we did, the game book that we did. So they're still around. We're going to do an LMS, learning management system, and we're going to start teaching them and canning them so that they'll be around after I'm gone. But we're starting with Afana, which is type 3. So we'll do 3, 6, 9, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And so we'll be doing that teaching from the novels. Like I said, we've changed them out of the game format into the novel format.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I know that I had some clients that purchased that for their kids, and they liked it. But it could really be any age if you're entering into it.
Sure. Yeah, we wrote them for like 13 to 130. So, you know, it's sort of like in the genre of, you know, C.S. Lewis, you know, it's like, you know.
For sure, like Narnia, yeah.
Madeline L'Engle, you know, you can read it and as a child and get one, you know, set of information from it, and then as an adult and get another bit of information from it.
So it's wonderful to hear that you're doing that now. It just seems like the logical thing to happen. And I'm going to have to look into your books to get them on
Hang on until hang on until we reissue them. I have a couple that are in PDF form that I can send you, but I've got all of them in PDF form, the workbooks that we wrote. But I'm happy to send those to you.
Oh, that would be great. I love anything and everything and applying it and seeing the patterns and the systems. That's why I'm now teaching TriStar, because people don't quite know what I'm talking about. But if they can see how the tritypes unfold, and that there are 3 triads, 9 that are in each triad. So even if you happen to have a tritype that seems 9-ish, let's say the 479 in particular, everyone thinks they're a 9, but they just have this fluid kind of mellow energy, and they're up in the 9 sector, so it makes sense.
Right.
So visuals do help people. So
absolutely, yeah.
It isn't enough to know your tritype. If you want to work with it, you need to know that your idealized image, core, fear, and defense strategy kind of reveals it. It's easier for new people than looking at their passion, fixation, and conviction, because they still have to understand what those words are referring to.
Exactly, I agree.
And then to neutralize it, you have to go from the holy ideas and the holy virtues and the holy actions. And then that makes that distorted belief of the head or the heart or the gut integrate. And that's why it's so helpful in the journey of consciousness, really, not just type. So, but who knew? Who knew all this?
That's what it's all about, right? The reason we teach it is, to be, the reason I teach the Enneagram is to, bring awareness and to shift our consciousness. That's the reason. It's not to know the box that we live in. It's not about that.
Exactly. It's to be able to look at it, observe it, but more importantly, then to make other choices. Or even if you still go into reaction, you know how to get out of the reaction.
Right.
And that's where Tritype helps so much, because your head could be giving you these fixed beliefs, and your heart could feel like it's emotional, life or death, and the gut says that's it, and be dogmatic. But if you know how to neutralize them, it's a natural inclination that we all prefer if we know about it.
Right. The antidote. Right.
It is the antidote. Speaking of which, a lot of people, and you learned early enough, did not realize that the fixations didn't come out until 1972, that it was just the passions, like that all the desert religions and fathers and seekers of the time, but they came out the end of 1972. So when you were in Eureka, had they already, when you're doing the 4th way, had they?
No.
They only knew of 3 centers.
Well, it was 7-story. Yeah, 7-story. Yeah. And so, so it wasn't until you got to level 5 man. Of course, they said it wasn't until you got to level 5 man that you began to integrate the body, the mind, and the heart. And you could start to then move into higher emotional, higher intellectual centers, as we talked about it from the Enneagram.
Yes.
So you have a different perspective. So no, I didn't really get the fixations until later.
Yeah. And Naranjo liked the 4th way too. And when he added the subtypes, he saw the 3 triads, which Ichazo called the instinctual triads, which were what we'd call head, heart, and gut. And the reason Naranjo did that was to honor the copyright of Ichazo and not use Ichazo's terms. And the reason he called it the Enneagram rather than proto-analysis was for the same reason. But having said that, he noticed that people had a more primitive, unconscious, really seriously unconscious part that was a mimic of these higher centers of head, heart, and gut. And that's when he took Ichazo's 3 triads and put them under each Enneagram type in a primitive way. And that's how he came up with the subtypes, which is why subtypes was an accurate description based on the fact he was using Ichazo's theory and just adding the primitive. And so it added more dimension, and then it added all these secondary and tertiary archetypes for each one, which, as we know, we used it amazingly.
Right.
In 1994, with the first conference, is when I realized, wow, I've only done research on people that I had typed and worked with. I need to add all these people at the conference. There were like 1,200 people who, most of whom did not know the Enneagram subtypes. So getting their answers to all the questions and seeing what they would see, and then those that knew the subtype, it did change types, because without the subtypes, you'd make all emotional 8s, 4s, and there are just a lot of things that where you'd make the social 7 a 2. There's just many ways that would happen. So it was so enriching, which is why I got so addicted to it, especially when I asked people to send their words, pictures, and phrases.
Yeah.
Total strangers sending the same picture,
Right.
different countries, different parts of the United States, Germany, but they had seen the same ad in the case of the 3, the Merit ad, Merit cigarette. And it's, you've got merit was the tagline. And one person's going, yes, 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 yes. And the other's going, yes, like this. And very 3-ish. I get why they liked it. And they sent it in as their example of 3. Now, it was in every magazine probably in 1994, 95. Maybe later. I didn't track it after that. But that's why I'm 40 years into the Enneagram, but 24 studies into different facets, because there's so much more to learn. I just think, wow, if that helped, now this person has the same structure, but different life experiences, but this is the lens they're using. When I'd find something, okay, the visual people in particular like the words. In fact, they say with the pictures, whereas the people who only like the words, they're not visual. Visual's in 3rd position. And then the kinesthetics can kind of go either way, but the auditory, it's ironic. They only want the words. They don't want the distraction of the pictures. They want to do their own imagining around those words. And I thought that was interesting. So everything that we look at, the adjective checklist, most California therapists use that when they're first adding someone, a new patient. And David Daniel said, Katherine, everyone will understand Tritype if you just do that. And I go, David, I did do that, but there's too many words missing for the average versions of the types. The 6s come out, 6s. It's like I should give them the adjective checklist and give everyone else the other question. And because he was really a strong supporter.
Yeah. Yes, he was, for both of us.
Yes, he was just amazing. He was so afraid that people wouldn't understand Tritype that he wrote a new endorsement saying that he liked my work with Tritype, not just subtypes and the other work. And I thought, really, really amazing man. Yeah. We were in a study group together for many years that began for me, it began in 1995 until his death. And the group's still going on, actually, but all coaches and therapists. And it gave us a really kind of well-rounded idea of the other types and talking. We met monthly, so it was really nice. So what else are you doing now? Or what would you like people to know about the Enneagram that, I knew I wanted to help people type better since there's so many mistypings. And then I did come up my recent one during COVID, where I had someone that could do all the different types of programming and program what I found working with people one-on-one. And that really at least notifies people that they're using a very rare pattern that only 6s and 9s use. And it's helped a lot of people consider 6 and 9 because they were just looking at the stereotypes. Oh, another stereotype. A whole chunk of the intellectual 9 was just left out because the defense strategy is to not know anything until you're ready to know it, until you're ready to do something about it. So you just put it out of your mind or you bury it. And the irony that Oscar Ichazo was an intellectual 9 is so noteworthy that could have been such a huge part left out of the Enneagram that they seek and seek and seek, but won't confirm anything because they don't want to be disappointed or separate themselves from others from different points of view. So what have you found over the years that you really want to say in this interview?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the combination of the spiral and the Enneagram. It's my work with couples. I mean, for me, it's about consciousness and consciousness from many different definitions of consciousness. And I think the most important tool for doing that is the Enneagram and the spiral. I think both of them combined are great. I think they inform one another. And so I think my work just continues along. Like I said, I'm now integrating Don and Russ's, 9 levels of health into it. And so we'll see where it goes from here. But for me, it's just to continue doing my work, my own work, continue doing my work with my community, and continue, watching the teachings. And, I love taking classes. I'm taking a class from Amos on instincts. And so I love my own learning, and I love, teaching. I think that's how I stay sane. Otherwise, this physical form is not my friend, and teaching helps me to feel a lot better. So that's where I am with it.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. I so appreciate what you're saying because even though I'd learned micro expressions and the Myers-Briggs types, the 16 personality types, and many other typologies, when I found the Enneagram, it could hold everything else. So if you knew the Enneagram type first and then put those descriptors as a secondary measure, and it just changed everything that I did, even the way I personal empowerment, which I had done since the 70s. And yet, the thing was that as people went along, like I was teaching Myers-Briggs in the 80s, and then there were very reasonable descriptions in the 80s, but over time, people were trying to allow for these differences they saw in people. So the ENTP I was a stereotype of in the 80s. Now, if you look at certain sites or like 16 personality types, it's being described like a disgruntled 6. And barely do you even see the 7 quality. And this happens with any set of descriptions. It happened with the Enneagram too, where people just wanted to write about the types or change the words of someone else's work. But if you didn't understand the other person's work, then it ended up saying things that wasn't true about a type. Like the most creative person is the 7, not the 4.
That's what I say, corporate work. Procter & Gamble, for instance, I say they hire 7s as the creatives, not 4s.
Yes.
And it's a whole different way of thinking about things. Right.
Yes. And didn't you find with businesses that, well, I would have 2 problems and 2 great opportunities. Like some businesses would just put their teams through whether they wanted to go or not. But I would usually say, if you walk away from this training knowing that there are different views of reality, all of which are inherently valid, not behaviors, view of reality, then you will pass this course. And I go, oh, really? That's all? I go, really? That's all? There happen to be 9 immediate versions with then more complicated versions. But yes. And then they just changed their tune. Then they weren't resentful that they were there like this. But in other companies, they made it optional. And so some people, I had many, many contracts with the Federal Reserve over 13 years, and actually 14. But anyhow, The point being that I taught in every division. So I taught to Team 5, I taught to those who did the infrastructure, statistics, BS&R, all checks and money, and 2 physical banks that I went to. And when they would feel that concern, and they were all just put into the system, I remember with checks and money, the 6 said, well, what is that symbol? Is that like, something that is like Satan or whatever, just to be. I said, do you have any money? And he said, yeah. I said, do you have any money on you? I bet you do. I could tell he was a self-president. And he said, yes, well, I do work in checks and money. And I said, pull out a $1 bill and tell me what those symbols mean. And then he looked at it and said, oh, okay. So it just, it's got the pyramid, it's got the triangle. And I go, these are universal symbols in the hands of the person using it.
Yep. Nice.
And so I do like that we can take all these truths, and whether it's spiral dynamics or Meher Baba's planes of consciousness, whatever system has been mapped out, and you understand it. They're usually in processes of 7 rather than 9. 9 just means wholeness and completeness, which is the circle encompassing the inner triangle and the hexad points. And therefore it becomes a system of process. Everything begins with type 9 out to 1 and ends with type 8 back into 9. And getting that helps us see how we can grow and change and feel happier and healthier. And if we're going to suffer, do so consciously, so that terrible feeling of feeling like some people feel abandoned or distraught by their circumstances. And certainly we've all had them, but to know that some of them are just predictable and just a part of life, and how to feel differently about those struggles is huge on my list.
Yeah. Conscious suffering is what it's all about. Unconscious suffering is a fool's errand as far as I'm concerned. I'm doing a class on Barbie, the wisdom teachings of Barbie, the movie, because it's a 4th way teaching. And it's amazing. It's like watching The Wizard of Oz, in a new genre. Basically, it's the same thing. So I'm looking forward to teaching that. My PowerPoint's all in pink, so just.
Oh, that's great. Well, Debs, thank you so much for being here. And I just love seeing you too, as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Katherine. I love seeing you. I love you. I appreciate you and your work, and I can't wait to see this.
Yeah.
Thank you, my dear.